Thank you for bringing to the table this one more interesting view and a European view about the consequences of Brexit for European member states and for the European integration process. So I think we can now open the Q&A session, and if Gerard agrees, we can collect a certain number of questions so that you and the discussants may reply at the end. So please introduce yourself, also for the sake of the registration and broadcasting, please.
We need a microphone.
The microphone is coming, yes.
My name is Giovanni Piccirillo. I work Italian Custom Agency. I am in charge with the Brexit discussion in Italy and in Brussels. Just tell you that we go in Brussels to discuss about Brexit with your money because we are paid from the Commission with the money, or even from UK. So that's one point. No, my question is about the border with, between North Ireland and Ireland. Because you are not in Schengen, you should have to have right now the control on the border from the police. So why you see it will become a problem to have a control for the goods that you have already control for the people? For example, Switzerland doesn't have a control for people. Switzerland is out of Europe, but is in Schengen. We don't have any check from police if you go from Italy to Switzerland. In spite, from North Ireland to Ireland, as I've understood, you have a policeman control. You have a border control for people, but no border control for goods, because you are in European Union, but you are out of Schengen.
Sure. Can you just take the mic, please? Yes.
Sorry, my name is Mauro Aparo. I'm working also for Fondazione Malfa, so thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm also Swiss citizen, so could you give me more information or explain me a little bit better the Swiss approach, what you mentioned in your chart before? Very much.
Okay, thank you. Yes, we're going to close, please. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the problem was, and I will discuss, has been already hinted to by Riccardo, but more explicit. In this negotiation, the UK can have a trade agreement, but there will be no agreement on services. There can be no agreement on services. In this sense, he's right. There is no soft Brexit on this. There is no precedent of an agreement based on equal recognition of equivalence between separate states. The only examples that you have is a limited recognition, unilateral concession of equivalence for certain trades, and unilateral means it can be withdrawn at any time. And the banks and the big American businesses in London have already understood this. What is going to happen, however, is another game, of which you see already signs, which is the fact that financial services are a rather fluid thing, and they are trying to find their own solutions, private market solutions. And the solution is has already identified the organizational model. The organizational model is called reverse merger, or reverse incorporation, rather. And the reverse incorporation means that my head office in London becomes a branch, and my branch in Frankfurt becomes the head office. And what they are trying to understand now is whether the European Union will let these companies trade in London as before. And the Commission is issuing sort of disturbed noises that they're going to impose enormous charges on capital to make this impossible, but actually this may work. If it doesn't work, London will simply, the financial services activity in London will simply lose the continent because, of course, London was the place financière for the continent for 50% of its activity, roughly, maybe more. And if the reverse incorporation doesn't work, then financial services will migrate. You know that in banking and insurance, you have long lead times. And in fact, all the establishments I know have already set up beachheads in Europe in the form of a subsidiary, a separate legal entity, although they don't know yet how much they will move into. Some of this is benefiting Dublin, of course. So the economic impact remains an open question, even if there is no agreement, because the markets may produce, it seems to me, some alternatives. And it remains to be seen what would be the regulatory response, because of course many in Europe, continent, were hoping that they would get some business. Another thing that has been taking center stage in many places is the role of clearing of derivatives, which is a rather large business in London with many benefits, of course, because it's a deep, thick, liquid market, and anything moving away that would be expensive. However, there is something new there too, which is target 2 securities. And actually, we are seeing many trading platforms migrating to target 2 securities, the new ECB platform. So this is another problem that may find solution actually out of the negotiations and even out of regulatory interventions to repatriate euro clearing. So I think the idea of an agreement based on mutual recognition of rules is not feasible. It will not happen. But this does not mean that there will not be market solutions that will keep at least a remnant of the present level of financial integration in place. But I would like to know what you think about this.
Okay. Thank you. We have one question from Professor Bartoli, and then we will come back to Professor Pennisi. Thank you.
Thanks. I have a question on the U-turn. I see your point about the political difficulties of a U-turn, but I still hope that facts, reality, will have a weight. For example, the UK is already with wage stagnating. At the same time, there is an increase, quite an increase in inflation. The UK has the lowest total productivity of Europe, apart from Italy. We are really the last. There has been already a bit of depreciation of the pound, and will not finish, clearly according to the Bank of England, otherwise there is no reason to increase the interest rate. At the same time, we know that depreciation now is not what increases competitiveness. So we can expect that the competitiveness will be lost, and actually the scenario of a negative supply shock for the UK is quite clear. In 2 years, all these consequences will be evident. So maybe at this point, a U-turn will be possible.
Okay, thank you. While the mic makes its way to Professor Pennisi, there's one more question on the left-hand side of the table, please.
Good afternoon, I'm Gabriele Mele from the Gasperi Foundation. My question concerns the Good Friday Agreement, which was signed in 1998. Obviously, it has to be renegotiated. I want to know, nowadays, with the political situation in Northern Ireland after Martin McGuinness' death and after Gerry Adams' resignation after 34 years of politics, I want to know how could it work? Thank you very much.
Read a different thing than the EU, in that it didn't belong to Eurozone, it didn't belong to Schengen, and so on and so forth. Brexit was already pretty much done, pretty much in the making. And Britain couldn't really stand the huge amount of rules and regulations coming from Brussels. A different authority than Westminster. That was something that my British friends were very much irritated about. Do you think that Brexit, for its emotional impact, will trigger some badly needed adjustments within the European Union and within the European Union institutions? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. And while leaving the floor to Gerard for his final remarks, I also like to bring the excuses by Vice Chancellor Professor Gambino, who could not be here tonight. He's stuck at a meeting at the Ministry of Education, so he texted me. He could not be here tonight, so he sent his excuses to the participants tonight. So, Gerard, please.
Okay, well, thank you for all those questions. All very knowledgeable, and I'll see what I can do. I realize that there are people here who are immensely knowledgeable about this whole history and this subject, and I will engage where I can in regards to these answers. The first one, political realignment in the UK. UK political system is not prone to realignment, but there are examples. One being Margaret Thatcher. She termed it herself a revolution, and the other being Tony Blair. Reshaping British politics. Once every 20 years, possibly, you will find this. Is the UK ready at the minute for political realignment? I don't get that feel, although you have Jeremy Corbyn sitting on the left of the spectrum and quite assertive in that, and Boris Johnson sitting on the nationalist right and celebrating the whole legacy of UK positioning on a global platform. I still don't get that instinct. There's no Macron. There's no signal that something is happening or moving. Quite possibly, give it a year, give it 2 years. Quite possibly. And while I was listening to the questions there, I was thinking constantly that we are discussing a situation that has not happened as yet. We could revisit this in 2019 with a different political situation altogether. And then we may be talking about realignment. But Brexit has not happened. All of the difficulties that have been mentioned will work their way through the system, and let's wait and see. Let's wait and see. In terms of the Irish border, there's actually 2 questions on this. I'll just take those questions together, if it's okay. The Good Friday Agreement was an international agreement brokered in part by the European Commission, an international agreement between the UK government and the Irish government. I'm sure Bill Clinton would like to be included in that as well, in regards to pushing this forward. Part of the Good Friday Agreement to embed peace in the society was to remove all barriers between North and South. The template, I can read it absolutely, the template was the Treaty of Rome. It was about removing barriers, building peace on the basis of prosperity and exchanging goods, exchanging the movement of people. All of this comes into play. Today you will see no physical barriers on the island of Ireland. We do have a special relationship as it stands. I would argue, and it's something that I have been suggesting to our political leaders, that we should be arguing for the extension of special status and a thing called the Special Support Programme. It's an investment, it is commitment to ensure that we have the stabilisation of political and economic activity between the north and the south of Ireland. So the expectation is, and I've no reason to doubt this, that we will get some sort of special status on the island of Ireland. So Northern Ireland, in a way, will be better off than the people of England, for example, who will not have that foothold into the European Union. One thing I have noticed crossing the invisible Irish border regularly is that there is a police presence, but the police presence is checking passports for asylum seekers and refugees. That's really the only visible view that you can see in terms of a border on the island of Ireland at the minute. If that border goes up in any visible or technical manner, we have had politicians who have suggested that they will go and they will take down the obstruction to Irish integration. They will take down that obstruction brick by brick themselves. And that was quite a serious statement. It's linked into just to get on this other point, it's linked into an agreement from 1998 that freed people on the island of Ireland from a history of conflict. In my lifetime, I would have come through probably about 30 years of conflict. And it would have been, at times, immensely intense, to the point where we would have to leave our home for months and then come back, as people do globally in conflict situations. The Good Friday Agreement, under the auspices of the respective governments, with the support of the European Union and the United States, embedded a peace programme that has sustained peace to this point. Now, part of the negotiations is to ensure that the Good Friday Agreement is maintained. And it is, for us, it is probably the biggest issue. Making sure that that document that was fought very hard for to bring peace to the island of Ireland will be maintained. It will be brought up at each part of these negotiations. The Swiss example, it's one of our options. It's one of our options, and there is a mechanism in place that ensures that the Swiss get benefits of trade, benefits of service exchange, benefits of EU activity with restrictions. My most sort of sensitive response to the Swiss system in place is the barrier on student movement, and the fact that the Swiss had to establish its own Erasmus program as such. And I'm saying that because we historically have had quite an involved relationship with Swiss universities. And we actually just continued irrespective. I mean, that was our answer to it, which could be an answer to a lot of these issues.
But they must respect freedom of
Yes, 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 of course.
Your opinion is not the first issue is not financial.
Yeah.
If you want to be in, you can be in, and then you lose the seat at the table. If you want the Lancaster House conditions, you're out, and I think there can be no agreement on regulatory arrangements. A trade deal is feasible, of course, and with open trade, I have no doubt on that. But the regulatory part, there are simply no precedents. It has never happened. It will not happen in this case. This is how, if you know the mechanism, that's the way it is.
Thank you for that. Ultimately, that's what it will come down to. Putting in place that mechanism, which I suppose it's that transition will lead us to the point where the mechanism rolls out. Okay. That's actually an issue that we need to look into in more detail. I mean, I do have a list of this mechanism in terms of the Swiss arrangement, but I was just talking to Giovanni earlier about the fact that we probably need to get university modules on Brexit to go into the detail of this. It is so complex and it is so immense. We need, at university level, we need to work harder, I think is the line. Okay. Amendments to agreements and services, and indeed the financial services in particular. We had an odd arrangement in Ireland in the week after the vote, where the Irish government suggested that it would have any amount of available space for any service, any financial transfers from London to Dublin. And immediately, and I realised that this was being prepared for, we have 55,000 office spaces for people from financial services to come from London to Dublin. And one other thing that was offered was a foothold in Northern Ireland. I immediately thought, that's very interesting, that the Irish government would have in some way, a legal foothold for financial service activity in Belfast. That to me seemed like a nice possible future for my city. The only problem is that some of our politicians saw it as, to get back to the Good Friday Agreement,
Politically troubled.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It's the interference of the Irish government in the UK. But a lot of this is happening behind closed doors between the banks, between the governments. The chatter that is going on is about migration. And I know that Boris Johnson has stated on a number of occasions that the City of London is strong enough to sustain any of these shocks. It is there. It is the biggest financial services enterprise globally, and it will survive whatever shock comes its way. Let's wait and see. Let's wait and see. Yeah. A U-turn. I think that was. I mean, these ideas have been brought forward relatively recently. I mean, some of these discussions would be months old in terms of sort of sending a letter to say we no longer want to leave. The idea of another referendum. All of this has come into the political discourse recently. To get back to the point, you've correctly listed the position of the UK in regards to wage, stagflation, inflation, low productivity, depreciation of the pound, which is very obvious to the population at the minute. Also, you have to throw in just the recent rise in interest rates, which will hurt people. The loss in competitiveness, yes, absolutely. The adjustment in that will take a decade and more, I would think, through Brexit. But, and to repeat the point from the start, we are now feeling the effects of the discussion around Brexit. Brexit has not kicked in formally as yet, and we are seeing inflation. We are seeing the problems around competitiveness. We're seeing flight of financial services. After March 2019, that's when it hits. That's when the shock hits. And the adjustment will have to be very carefully managed. Resilience is part of this. I realize that business can be very resilient. The market is the market, and it will work irrespective. But there will be sectors that will collapse. There will be transition. There will be pain, as quite a number of the politicians have mentioned, including senior members of the Brexit campaign. But that is all in the future. And I think there's one more here. That comes back to this original point about political realignment. I am very conscious that in terms of the electorate, you did have 37% of people voting for Brexit. The others voted to remain or didn't vote. There is also the point that has been made on a number of occasions that Brexit will affect particularly young people. Is there of an entrepreneurial spirit who will want to travel? They want to be in Paris. They want to be in Rome. They want to move. That's where I think the debate will lie in the future, and it is where you see activity happening. That is students. It's young people. It's a discourse that we will see emerging, and let's see where that takes us. And as an academic, I hopefully will be facilitating some of that, and indeed being respectful to all interpretations of this debate as we move along.
Okay, thank you, Gerard. Thanks again for being here, and thanks again to the Center for American Studies for hosting this conversation, and thanks to our discussants for their generosity and time, and hopefully see you in 2018 for the 4th Enzo Grilli lecture. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.